Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Sales Pros event. I'm super excited to get started in today's topic, selling in an economically sensitive time. But before we begin, I'll give folks a couple more minutes to trickle in. And as we wait for folks to join us, I'd love to ask our amazing panelists some icebreaker questions. As we are nearing the end of 2023, I know it's only mid December. I kind of want to get a head start on 2024 New Year's resolution ideas. So I'd love to ask our panelists if they had given a thought of their New Year's goals, or if they haven't. But if so, please share. Bo, we'll kick things off with you. Do you have any New Year's resolution goals?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My partner and I actually just completed a move. We're here in Austin, Texas, and the area we moved to is much more walkable. So we have two little adopted 13-pound dogs that are just the lights of our life. And next year, a big resolution of mine and of ours as a family is just to spend more time outside and more time walking, and really, really excited for all of the places that we can walk to. I actually walked to the office that I'm in right now this morning. So I was a holdout for a long time on getting a Apple Watch, and I've now converted and am very into my steps. So that's where my head is at. What about you, Samarth?
Amazing, Bo. For me, it's so we have a 3-year-old, and I'm very aware that at some point he's going to get into the school system. So our goal is to max out on avoiding any of the busy uh, holiday seasons when tickets are all booked out and too expensive. So we want to try and squeeze in more than our usual once-a-year trip. So my goal is to do 2 abroad trips this year. So looking forward to that, and it's always something that I aspire to and motivates me in my day to day is just the entertaining the idea of having a trip and experiencing different cultures and civilizations. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I always say my resolution this year is not to make any resolutions because I never keep them. But this next year, I am gonna focus on cracking 100 in my golf game. I am not a great golfer, and I'm not trying to get on the PGA. But for the amount of time I spend on the golf course, I think it's time to put some real focus onto it. So I've actually bought lessons, and I'm after almost 20 years of playing, I'm really gonna start taking it seriously, I guess now.
Have you ever had a hole in one?
No, no. I've had a
2024 is the year. I can
yeah,
feel
I've
it.
probably gone through a whole case of balls on a hole, but never a hole in one. Never a hole in one.
Well, amazing. Thank you all for sharing. I'm very excited for 2024. I too am in the active train and I'm training for a half marathon, my first ever marathon. So we'll see how that goes. Amazing. So let's get started. This event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own. We do this through our online robust forum. We also have our quarterly summits, our in-person events, and our virtual events like the one you're at today. So if you're not already a part of MSP, you'll be invited to join right after this event. Some quick housekeeping notes before we start. If you have a question for our amazing panelists, please use the Q&A function at the top right-hand corner or leverage the chat and also let us know where you're calling in from. I see there's a lot of folks in Texas joining us today. And second of all, this event is being recorded. So if you want to watch the playback or if you have a friend or colleague who couldn't make it, rest assured the key takeaways recording and all the links mentioned on this call will be made available on the MSP website before the end of the day. We will also share that link with you via email. And last but not least, this event wouldn't be made possible without our sponsor for today's event, Calendly. Calendly is your hub for scheduling meetings professionally and efficiently, eliminating the hassle of back and forth emails so you can get back to work. You can learn more about Calendly here. I'll drop the link in the chat, and you can definitely check them out. They're doing awesome things. And enough about me. I'm going to pass it off to Samarth, who's going to be moderating today's event. So, Samarth, please take it away, and I'll come back for closing remarks.
Sounds great. Thank you, Angelica. Hello, everyone. Welcome to an exciting day today. I'm looking forward to spending the next 50 minutes or so with you all. And really, this topic is so near and dear to our hearts. I mean, we've all been through the crests and troughs that this last few years have brought on us, and I think it's tested every part of ourselves, mentally, physically, your family lives, everything under the sun. And I think it presents both an obstacle, and in that obstacle is an opportunity for each of us to discover more about ourselves and our companies and our future, etc. With that backdrop, right, I'll jump in with a quick background. I'm Samarth Mittal. I lead global sales planning and analytics for Rubrik across our acquisition and renewals team. I have the great fortune of working with an amazing team that is highly motivated, and we're on a mission to help provide and protect um, companies across the globe with business resilience against cyber attacks, against malicious insiders, and helping them make sure that they're operationally and business ready to conduct their business. We secure companies' data across the enterprise, the cloud, and SaaS, making your business unstoppable. So with that quick intro, I'll pass it off to Bo and Mike, respectively, to do their intros as well.
Thanks, Samarth. And hey, y'all, all the Texans. I am happy to have y'all here. And my name is Bo Hinton. I lead our enterprise sales group at Calendly. And I know we got a little bit of a plug at the beginning as the sponsors for today, but in my role, I very specifically focus on leading the teams that serve our large enterprise customers. Many people know of Calendly as a one-to-one scheduling solution. It certainly is that, but it is also a meeting lifecycle platform that can help address and does help address many very complex scheduling use cases to ultimately give your customer-facing teams more time back in their days to take care of your customers, grow revenue, and retain revenue. So we'll get into some more of that later in the conversation, but I'm super excited to be here, and thanks for joining the discussion. Mike, I'd like to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Bo and Smarth. My name is Mike Kavanaugh. I am a Senior Director of Sales here at Zendesk in our SMB org. So SMB for Zendesk is any company with 1 to 250 employees, so large chunk of the American business. And I think I'm fortunate to work for Zendesk. Most of you have probably used Zendesk, you just don't know it. If you've opened a ticket with a customer service team to ask about returning an item or fixing an item, it's probably been Zendesk on the back end. We strive to be a leader in the customer service experience, both for our customers and their CX employees. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Been here for about 12 years, but originally from New York. And I'll just say this: go Tommy DeVito last night. Love the hometown story. So excited to be here and hopefully see some more people from the Atlanta market on the call.
Sounds great. Thank you, guys. So let's jump right in. I think this topic is quite interesting, and I would love if the audience has questions, we can jump in and out a little bit, break the script. But why don't we get started with just painting the picture in terms of how do you see the selling environment today versus what it was, let's say, pre-COVID? What has changed in your day-to-day? And I'll just kind of put out the context there, right? Like there's still some talk about, oh, is there still a recession there? We know the inflation that wave that we're kind of riding. There's rising debt. There's two major global conflicts out there, and with that, it brings a lot of uncertainty in the selling setup, right? Like whether it's the deal velocity we're talking about, it's the different personas and stakeholders that are involved in the selling process, and on, right? So would love to kind of hear from your experiences, Bo and Mike. What are you guys finding in the market today, pre-COVID versus in the last year or two?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, and it's actually, I think, really important to frame out the rest of the conversation. It's hard to talk about selling at an economically sensitive time without understanding how we got here. So when I think about COVID's impact, it really thrust essentially every business very suddenly and abruptly out of the physical offices where they'd established the systems of collaboration that were really ingrained in the culture of doing business and into a digital first posture. And this was uncharted territory for most organizations. And the result was it created major tailwinds for many technology companies and jolted growth, I think, particularly for technology companies with solutions that help solve for or provide a solution for collaborating remotely and in a distributed fashion, and all of the challenges that creates. So, flash forward, this resulted in a surge of tech buying, sometimes sort of like frantically, to address these very real issues in the uncharted waters that doing business amidst a global pandemic created. And now many organizations today are left with an amalgamation of different tools that were procured and ingested across their orgs and ecosystems without like a lot of order. And many of these businesses are now feeling the economic headwinds in the market today themselves. And that's driving a huge push towards consolidation. And they're getting pressure to audit what they currently have and understand where is their redundancy in their tech stack and where can they cut or reduce tech spend. And to me, I also see a lot of customers now feeling like they have a lot of shelfware. So software that was purchased and either isn't being used or isn't being used enough to justify the cost associated with it. And they're just acutely aware of the drag that that's having on their bottom line. And I think the so what on all of that is every new dollar being spent is harshly scrutinized. And we see the CFO stepping into places and commanding more oversight than they were a few years ago. And that part to me lends us to the core of today's conversation. And for me, it's that every interaction we have with a potential or an existing customer has to at least be in part of really uncovering, identifying, and quantifying a specific pain. And your go-to-market teams have got to understand your customers' businesses and their data to help them build compelling business cases that are going to really stand up and be able to be pressure tested and impact your customers' bottom line. And without that, I think it's awfully difficult to get deals done in today's environment. So that's kind of my 360, I think, to kind of frame up the conversation. Yeah. I'm curious, Mike, from your perspective, how much of that have you seen? And is there anything you would add or on that you see differently?
I think you summed it up amazingly, Bo. I think the other part to look at this is the lead up to COVID as well. Because prior to Zendesk, I was in the startup world. And frankly, in private capital, venture capital was cheaper. It was easier to go and raise capital for your business and grow. And then COVID happened, and those digital companies, those companies that enabled remote work, really accelerated very quickly. And some of the growth metrics were unrealistic. It was grow at all costs. Just keep hiring salespeople. First line managers could buy whatever software they wanted. And, I think personally, I say this, I manage teams of younger, newer account executives. And I say, this is a tough time, but I started my career back in 2007 and 2008. I'm going to date myself selling BlackBerries. And I'll tell you, if you can be really successful, if you can learn to really understand the business challenges, I think that's the difference. Before, first line managers, a company could come and buy something and it wasn't great. There wasn't, to your point, there wasn't a lot of scrutiny around the buying process. Now, regardless, and I've sold an enterprise like Bo, regardless if it's an enterprise customer or an SMB customer, the CFO, the CEO, everybody's looking at that bottom line. It's not growth at all costs, I think, anymore. It's profitable growth, scalable growth. They want to make sure that they're getting the usage and the value out of what they're buying. And my advice to the salespeople that are earlier in their career that are getting into sales at this point, I'm not saying it was ever easy, but it was easier for the last several years. If you can be really good at understanding the business challenges, not just taking orders, but understanding the business challenges and the business outcomes the customer is trying to drive. If you can be successful now, when we get to the boom times, and there will be another boom, you'll be even more successful because you focused on value creation, not just hitting a number. So I think that's a big factor. COVID accelerated, but the groundwork for what is going on right now were a long term in the making of raising large capital funds. Every startup was a unicorn, right? And I think I'm actually happy to see companies getting back to how do we make our AEs more productive, more efficient, more effective. I think this is actually a good thing for sales. We're gonna get back to sharpening and developing skills for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, there's the saying, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I think that's always going to be true to some extent, but there's not a lot of getting lucky in sales environment.
No. And there's a question here: was it COVID or 0% interest rates? I think it was a combination of the two. It was cash was cheap. I was an econ major. Cash was less expensive to borrow and get, so it was easier to do these vast rounds of funding. And then it was grow at all costs. People weren't looking at profitability, adoption, net retention, those things that are really core values in a company. Prior to joining Zendesk, I was the VP of Sales, Marketing, and Customer Success for a private equity-owned company, and we reviewed those numbers every quarter with the board to make sure that we were building a profitable and scalable business. And I think we're just seeing a return to a more traditional business model than we saw probably in between 2015, 16, and 2020. Or 2022 now, right? So I think we're just getting back to a more reasonable business model.
Yeah,
that's spot on. Well said, Mike and Bo. Thank you. And I think just to back that up, right? I mean, it's quite clear that the markets also are rewarding the companies that are able to demonstrate that profitable growth. It's no longer just, oh, by the way, we grew 60%, but we had a massive drag on that with a negative cash flow, and the NRR was spiraling out of control. It's that sustainability. You're able to demonstrate that year after year, you can come back and hit your margin, you can hit your cash flow metrics and so on, and that you have a business model that can stand the test of time, right? So just, really great opening thoughts there and remarks. I heard things around, there's a lot of consolidation happening, whether it's across your tech stack, there's scrutiny across every dollar that's being spent. It's requiring kind of, in most cases, going up to a CFO, and therefore it requires our teams to be armed with a compelling business case that would justify investment in those endeavors. So just kind of pivoting us to our next question, which would be around, so what strategies are you empowering and enabling your teams with to get ready in this new era, and what changes that you're seeing your companies make from a go-to-market perspective, and kind of how are you pivoting the day-to-day selling motion or the sales process, and the ecosystem that you're surrounding yourself with?
Yeah. Well, I think Mike, you made a good point in sort of your opening thoughts that right now it is a difficult time to sell, but I think it's going to create a lot of really good sellers, and the cream will rise to the top. And because you can't get by maybe the way that you could have in a really flush economy, I think that this is the time to be forged in the fire, right? I think from a coaching perspective, we're talking with our teams about spending more time and more of our resources really focused on how we can partner with our champions in the discovery and validation stages of the sales process more deeply, to be better journalists up front. And ultimately, that will make us a better consultant to our customers. These champions are really driving the purchase process forward on the customer side, and they're often just the tip of the iceberg in their buying committees. So we're trying to slow down and have a deeper understanding and more empathy for the challenges our customers are facing and the very real resource constraints that they're challenged by with these tighter and more heavily scrutinized budgets. And in almost all cases, they're being asked to do more with less dollars, less team members. So we have to really help them build a data-driven business case every single time that's going to be defensible in front of an executive committee or a CFO. They almost always get asked, we're finding, what do we already have that can solve this problem? Is this absolutely critical to growing our business or serving our customers? And hey, can we get by without it? Do we need to buy this? And the business cases that we're building with our customers, I'm just really challenging my teams to make sure that those business cases are answering and addressing all of those questions in spades, and that we are putting ourselves on the same side of the table as our customers and our champions to empower them to tell the story with their data, not our data about here's the ROI we've seen and look at all of the great case studies. Like those can be good aids too, but it's your customers' data that are going to tell a strong story internally. It's going to be really credible and ultimately get a project funded.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Bo said. I think if this is an opportunity for salespeople people early in their sales career, midway through their sales career, to really double down and focus on the skills that are going to make them better: discovery, deal control, demonstrations. But to Bo's point, that value creation, ROI calculators have been around a long time, and some of them have shown insane ROI returns. I think it's really important to get the data from the customer and make sure you're validating it with the customer. And I'll say from a personal standpoint, again, I'm running I run some SMB teams here at Zendesk. Often our AEs are in they just got promoted from a BDR role, or they're in their first or second year in a closing role. The strongest thing we need to do is understand not the technical challenges. I know I keep saying this, but not the technical challenges the customer is facing, but really, what are the business challenges they're facing? What are the things that they're trying to achieve or fix in their business? I can tell you as somebody who used to and still gets a lot of outreach, I'm probably not going to take time out of my day to speak to somebody unless I've already identified that issue as something I need to solve. And so when I get on the phone, I don't want to talk about the features and capabilities. I want to say, hey, here's what I'm trying to fix. Can you help me fix this? Show me specifically how you're going to help me do that, and help me build that business case, whether it's to my CEO, my CFO, my board. I think that's really important. And again, for the salespeople early in their career now, it's really important that understanding how you manage the deal cycle, how you asking the hard questions up front. Ask about who else is involved, because there's no buying cycle at this point, whether it's SMB, mid-market, commercial, enterprise, where one person's making the decision. It hasn't been that way for a long time. But if you're not asking about finance, you're not asking about legal or IT, because IT is on a mission to consolidate, right? We've seen that in the market. Gong and Clary and outreach tools that all of us have used in sales for years, they're consolidating, trying to have one platform. We're seeing that, Salesforce, you're seeing that with other players. So it's really important that you're separating yourself from potentially other tools that they may already have that may be somewhat adjacent. For us personally, we're focused on actually, we're going back to a hybrid model, of sales A's having existing and new businesses, but we're giving them less existing customers because we want them to get closer to them. We want them to build better relationships with them so they can go deeper into those accounts and expand, wider and deeper into HR, IT, employee experience. So I think that's really important. And then doubling down on our outbound efforts. But tactically, I think, that's the other thing. Marketing leads are dwindling, inbound leads are dwindling. So we're going to have to get good again at outbound prospecting and creating awareness and value for those customers who might not know about your solution or about the challenges others are facing in that space.
Those are great points, Mike and Bo. And I think you hit the nail on the head with, it's not just, as a seller, you're kind of disciplined and you're going through that sales process, but it's also the ecosystem that you surround yourself with, right? Like whether it's, how are you partnering with the SDR teams? If you have a channel or alliance, right? How can you bring more people into the fight? And I think that goes back to the point that you were making earlier, is that how do we get really good at the discovery, right?
Yeah.
Once the deal gets into the, you're going through a demo, you're going through the negotiation. A lot of times when deals stagnate at that point, the actual issue is not that it's stagnating at that point. It's actually something that was not done
You
early on in
missed.
the cycle.
You missed earlier. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Whether it was, did you uncover the right amount of pain? Did you quantify it? Did you talk to the right number of stakeholders? Or did you just meet one person and say, oh, by the way, that person can be a potential champion. I'm going to move it to stage 2 or whatever, right? So are you being multi-threaded enough across that ecosystem so that you're building not just one, but multiple champions?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing I see when I review calls with AEs, and just kind of doubling on this about the discovery, the customer or the prospect will ask a question, and I'll see AEs, they're so quick to answer it and say, hey, yes, we can do that, answer that question, and move right along. And they don't stop and double down on, hey, here's what I heard from you. Yes, we can do that. Here's how I can do it. How can I ask why you brought that up? Is what's driving that question behind it? Because then you can get to figure out what's really going on in the business. They're asking that question for a reason, not just to check a box to see if you have a feature.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that beyond being curious and being great journalists, great sellers are great project managers. And so I think being able to make sure that you're setting a strong foundation during the discovery portion of the engagement to really get a handle on what is it going to take to get this deal done, and what does this look like if we bring this to fruition, is really important, because that's your best chance to get a mutual action plan in place, or at least the beginning of a mutual action plan, to get the buy-in from your customer on what they're going to do and what it's going to take to actually procure your solution. So, and I think you earn the right to ask those questions if you are leading with genuine curiosity in the earlier parts of the discovery conversation around their business, their pain, what they're trying to solve for. And I think the best piece of advice I could give to sellers for that beginning part of discovery is be brave and be provocative. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions. The person you're talking to initially may not always have the answer, but if they don't, that will almost certainly spur an interesting sort of next path or place to take the conversation. Who else can you talk to inside of the business to learn that? And if you get asked, hey, why are you asking me that? Or that's my financial data. It's, hey, because I want to work together with you to make sure this makes sense and is going to impact your bottom line, and that it's going to be a worthy investment. And there is almost no one who I think could fault you on a buyer prospect side for asking questions that are focused on curiosity around their business and their problems.
And to double down on Bo's point here, it's a great way to pressure test the relationship built with these prospects and customers. If they can't share that information, if they won't share that information, do you really have a partner, a champion in this, or are they kind of keeping you at arm's length? That's a good leading indicator.
Yeah. And Byron, I see you have a question there. Whenever I said to use the customer's data and not our own, I think a great specific example of that would be if you are talking to a marketing team, for example, about how to optimize their funnel from someone at a point of, perhaps awareness or very early stages of interest, all the way down into a conversion that shows up as an opportunity in a salesperson's pipeline, or ultimately a closed one piece of business. I could tell that prospect or customer all day, hey, here are the benchmarks that we have from other marketers on their funnel metrics and where they see drop-offs throughout their customer journey and what those drop-offs are typically based around. And that could be interesting. It's interesting to have benchmarks. It's much more compelling if I take that marketer along with me and say, hey, I've actually gone to your site, which is the front page of your business, and this is what I understand your experience to be today to capture a new customer. Is this correct? Is this how your acquisition funnel is currently constructed? Have a conversation and then say, hey, tell me from your perspective, where are you seeing the largest drop off in your funnel? If you're a marketer, you don't want a leaky funnel and different people fall out at different places. So if that particular prospect is willing to share their data with me around where they are seeing a drop off in conversion rate, perhaps it's from MQL over into a qualified sales qualified opportunity. Perhaps it's somewhere higher in the funnel. If that customer tells me where they're seeing a drop off and what that drop off is, then I can help them say, hey, I believe we could address or fix this, and here's by how much based on these things I've seen with customers that look just like you. Their data is going to mean a lot more than if I use a benchmark across an industry.
Yep. Hopefully that answers your question, Byron. And just to double down, I think, the value conversation is so important. And, part of that is also just having the context. Have you done your research around if it's a public company? Have you looked at the 10Ks? Have you looked at what some of the key stakeholders are posting on social media, right, on this digital world? If it's a private company, perhaps you're looking at sources like Crunchbase or Glassdoor reviews, right? And then you're formulating a point of view around what are some of the key strategic goals for that company? What are their corporate objectives? What are some of the business initiatives they're thinking about for the next year or two? And how is the careers of each of the individual potential buyers or champions that are on your panel going to get impacted by that? And then, tying your business case, I've seen this when I've seen this done really well, is like, it's typically three things that would matter to a company. It's about making money, right? Are we going our top line? Are we saving money, right? So keeping our bottom line in check, or are we preventing risk, right? And if we can attack either of these three in some shape or form, I think you typically have you've tested the waters then, right? But then also, as you're continuing to build the champions and getting to that economic buyer, like, are you able to pressure test that? So you're getting multiple people, because people are always willing to give you advice, versus if you're always in presentation mode, it's hard for you to kind of get that two-way dialogue going. One of the, back in my consulting days, I spent about 10 years both selling to companies as well as managing the projects that I ended up selling. I remember one of the projects we were struggling to get through the gates and funded. While the CFO was in agreement, there was a lot of pushback and the project was potentially getting delayed. And we got to know that it was actually the CIO that was pushing back. And so as we continued to dig through, we understood that there was a lot of other competing priorities and projects on their roadmap. And so they were struggling to squeeze yet another one because it would require replacing a current vendor with a new one and getting all of that work instrumented. Oh, well, now we got the CFO and the CIO talking with that, hey, there's a clear business justification. You're not just status quo. You're actually going to save dollars. And in fact, over out years, you're going to actually drive more revenue growth for the business. And that acted as a vehicle for us to allow the CIO to get funded in order to orchestrate that migration and transition that we were looking for. And that helped clear the gate. So I think that's where you kind of, as you start to get more multi-threaded in an organization, you can build, a voice and start to get to know what's really happening and what could potentially prevent. Because the last thing you want as a seller is that, you reach December 31st or Jan 31st and you're like, is this deal going to come? Is it going to, what could potentially be a roadblock? And just having that healthy level of paranoia, but then making sure that's translating into actually actions in the field. So I'll pivot to a next piece, which is just around, what have you seen that's working in terms of PG? I know you touched on it briefly, Mike, in terms of, potentially looking at outbound and some of those areas that maybe you're exploring. Can you share some of the strategies and tactics that you're working on, and potentially if there's any interesting stories around what is working from a PG standpoint, what is resonating? Because as a seller, the last thing you want is just showing volume for the sake of it. And we all have been on a forecast call where it's a lot of hope and prayer, but we know that that doesn't end up translating into actual bookings, right? So walk us through, like, what has changed in terms of PG in this new environment, and what avenues exploring.
Oh, yeah, I mean, obviously, every company is trying to expand their wallet share with their existing customers. They're trying to grow their existing customers because it's faster and easier than new business. I think from a new business, and I talk to the from the existing customers, I can talk about the new business, but with our expansion customers, we're and I've done this before. It's really getting deep on the data. We have more data at our fingertips on our customers' adoption of the platform than probably ever before in sales. And I think it's, sometimes that can be overwhelming to an AE, to a customer, to whoever. So it's really working with the product team, your customer success team, and sales to understand what does a really healthy, growing customer look like? Who's a customer that's really sticky? What are the key? And each business has to identify this, right? Whether it's average number of active users, how much volume of tickets they're processing, whether it's how much time they're logged into the app, whatever those metrics are, they need to identify those 3 or 4 metrics, and then have a simple and easy way for salespeople to see are those metrics increasing over time? Are they decreasing over time? Are they flat? And then figuring out, okay, if they're growing, okay, why, getting in front of those customers like, hey, I saw X, Y, and Z, that's fantastic. Congratulations. Typically when we see this type of adoption, customers are growing and they hit this next phase and they may need these other capabilities. So it's leading with, understanding, asking them about what's going on in the business, and then providing, that subject matter expertise to say, typically when we see customers at this stage of growth, at this stage of adoption, these are the things they're thinking about, or they should be thinking about as they go to that next phase, right? And Zendesk is a perfect example. We work with businesses that start with 5 or 10 agents, and in 2 years, 3 years, especially in the last 10 years, they've grown to 50 agents. And maybe what worked with 5 or 10 agents doesn't work with 50 agents. So it's taking that consultative approach backed by their, again, to Bo's point, their data, not arbitrary data that, hey, this is how you've been using it. Here's how we optimize it. Hopefully finding, ways to upsell and upgrade there. I think that to me is how you use product adoption, product growth to expand existing customers. And then with new customers, the product-led growth that was very popular, and I think that'll still continue to be very popular. Calendly, I know I'm a Calendly customer. I used it. I think there's probably a great story there. But I think there has been a shift because of the scrutiny from finance and bottom line metrics to look at every product. So we have to use product-led growth metrics and sales skills and bring those together. And so when you're talking about a new customer, if they come to your website and they sign up for a trial account and they go into the trial, make sure your product team makes that a seamless, easy use experience. And then again, start tracking those metrics and have proactive reach out as they've hit milestones. Did they connect it to their email calendar? Did they connect it to their CRM, to their marketing automation tool, whatever those things are, so you can have informed conversation with your customers, and it's just not a generic show up and throw up type of thing that worked in the past. Nothing worse than as an executive when I go to a website, I find a company that's going to help me solve my problem, and an SDR or a BDR or an AE, maybe I signed up for a trial and they haven't even taken a minute to look at my company, look at my profile, look at my instance, and I've got to do the work for them. That's not going to work anymore. Sorry, that was kind of long-winded, but those are the from an expansion side, it's really knowing what good and great looks like and having training that gears the AEs to know what to say at those moments. And in a new business, you're going to have to demonstrate your value because it is more competitive for you.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And at Calendly, we are really fortunate to have this tremendous flywheel of growth through the product-led growth motion. And many of our customers do discover us from just the virality of the product. Maybe it's a single scheduling link they see in an email and thought it was easy to use. And then that results in us having millions of customers that dip their toes with us for the first time with the free version of our offering. And then they start getting value from the product right away, which is great. And that creates a really bountiful reservoir of customers that quickly mature to a place where they outgrow that free offering. And to Mike's point, you have to really understand as a sales professional, whether you're an SDR, or you're a BDR, or you're an AM, you have to understand what are the meaningful sort of thresholds or activities or behaviors that you can see in the product that actually indicate that someone is a good fit to grow with your organization, whether from a plan upgrade perspective or just expanding across their organization for a larger or more complex use case across a bigger team, because that can be without the right data points that you're looking for and without the enablement through the products to be able to find them. That's like looking for a needle in a haystack, especially when you are fortunate enough to have a very large number of customers. So I think for us, when we understand where are the right places to engage, these conversations become really fun for us to have because this is where the sales-led motion shines and is very complementary to our product-led growth motion because we can capitalize on the hard work the product has already done and then understand the bigger picture from our customers and help them move from that one-to-one point solution with scheduling to, for example, a really complex intent-based routing problem they're trying to solve across all of their customer-facing teams in their broader organization. And the role of sales in that, I believe, is to act as a concierge or a guide to connect the dots for them and help them get to a more ubiquitous organizational-wide value from Calendly. But all of that, again, it requires you understanding you got to know what you're looking for, right? And then I think the second piece too is we have been maniacally focused on the right ICPs. So understanding what personas, types of teams, types of organizations are the most successful with Calendly. Those are the places that we are spending the proactive resources, time, energy pursuing. We're not casting a wide net and hoping we catch something. We're going more surgically after people that we believe really have a high potential to grow and are already showing those signs and those indicators of success based on their initial product usage and consumption.
Yeah, I saw Nil's question here. I think this is a good one to talk about because I think it's very apt for how this conversation started. So he asked, a team of 12 salespeople in 2021 to over 80 in Q1 of this year. I have follow-up questions, but if you had 12 AEs working inbound leads and now you have 80 AEs working inbound leads, did your marketing budget increase at the same rate as your AE growth, right? It's a math problem there, or have you shifted to an outbound model? And to what Bo said, I think it's really digging into, if you're moving from inbound to outbound, when you move to outbound models and to sales-led growth, those ICPs and those ideal, account bases are really critical because there's only so many hours in the day. You want your AEs hyper focused on the right businesses and the right people at those businesses to target. Nels, happy to dig in deeper, but there's a lot to unpack there. What was the sales motion when you had 12 versus 80? How much does the marketing budget shift? Because if you've got the same marketing budget at 12 people as you have at 80, yeah, they're going to have to do more outbound and more prospecting. And that takes a different level of activity, skill, marketing, messaging, etc.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously an inherent emphasis on the concept of personal PG, right? As a rep, what is your Rolodex? What are you bringing to the table? And sometimes I think, there's obviously a lot of value in people kind of moving across functions or industries or different products, but I think there's also incremental value in, within that same domain, because you build that network, that expertise. And a lot of what I'm seeing is that the buying motion tends to be based on referral, right? I know my buddy at XYZ bank or healthcare company bought this solution. We were talking about it over dinner. These were some of the challenges and value that they're seeing. And that's where a lot of the decisions or, indirect subconscious marketing is happening for the product. And I think that's where it comes down to something that you were mentioning, Mike, is like, how are we delivering post the initial sale, right? Are we tracking the adoption? Are we tracking the deployment and the actual value delivery of those products, and making sure that, you're building champions across the organization? Because you could have sold in a particular business unit in 1 year. Well, you're going to be going back to business unit number 2 or 3, or potentially extending that to other companies in your market space. So kind of going back, Niles, to your comment there, right? Like that's another area that you can start to scale, where not necessarily, you need as much of a dollar outlay, but like, this is our strategic account-based plan in terms of how we're going to address this market or this geography.
Yeah, and that makes me think about some more. I think it's like really important, especially in this market. If you're on a licensing per seat model, or if you go business unit by business unit, whatever your model is, being really deliberate and intentional about sizing correctly up front and not overselling. You want to make sure that you're identifying a plan with your customer who is representing the buying committee for exactly what teams and individuals are going to use the licenses. And, for me, this is important for a couple of different reasons. The business case and ultimately the dollars your customer is asking finance for, directly signing for themselves, it's much tighter with a very specific plan. And any quantification you can do against the very specific plan will help your customer get it sold. And I think when you have a plan that's truly reflective of who and how your customer is going to activate with you, like that's a win-win. And then I think the other reason is you're setting up your internal partners and implementation and customer success for a better handoff. And that's going to create a smoother customer experience and really connect back to giving your customer the quickest possible time to value. And when you're meticulous about sizing correctly up front, you do increase your chances of inspiring quick growth with a customer versus the alternative, which would be saddling them with more than they need, and it becomes shelfware, and it creates a slower and longer path to adoption. And that ultimately is going to put the renewal at jeopardy, and it's going to negatively impact net retention.
Yeah. As long as everyone promises not to tell this to my managers and my AEs, I would say I'd rather you sell the smaller deal to start and make sure that adoption is really good up front. Because there's nothing worse than having to go back and unwind a bad oversizing or overcommitment for a customer who didn't need those seats. I'd rather, and I think a lot of companies have been burned by this because of historical, Oracle, Salesforce, those big SaaS companies, they overbought and it never got where they want. The value structure, companies now have learned they'd rather start small, build value with the team, get your champions really successful, and then it'll be a lot easier to grow than to have to come and contract that. I know it seems a bit counterintuitive, but that's the market we're in. The time to value, the value of the product, making sure they're seeing that success that you've talked about with them is really critical. And I think now the A's I've had this year that have done really well successfully are the ones who've worked really closely with their customer success managers to make sure their customers are getting value from the product.
Yeah, that's great. Great thoughts there. So I know we're getting close in on time. So, audience, if you have any Q&A, feel free to drop those in the chat, or I think you can unmute as well. But in anticipation of that, I'll continue with the next one that we have, right? Obviously your reps time is really critical, and we want to make sure that that's being spent appropriately. What advice would you have for them, as they try to, obviously there's certain admin pieces that need to be managed and that are necessary. And, two-part question there is like, are there any tools or technologies that you found that have provided the necessary leverage, whether, it's in the area of sales engagement, sales intelligence, marketing automation, whatever that list might be, reporting analytics? Are there certain leverage points that you've been able to find?
Yeah, I'll say this. If you're a sales leader or a sales manager, or more importantly in sales operations, I've ran those organizations before. I think it's your responsibility to, whether you're using Salesforce or HubSpot, I don't really care, but you're constantly auditing your tech and your process so they match up. You're making sure that there's not extraneous fields, right? That's your responsibility. If you're running operations, you're a sales leader, like, what information do I absolutely need to have to move this deal forward? And how do I take that and put it right in front of the AEs and the customer success managers? And any tools that consolidate, right? And I kind of mentioned it earlier. You've seen Clarity has bought a call recording software. Gong is, introducing engagement. I think every sales company, any company with a sales org, has a responsibility now to look at the tools that they have and say, hey, where can we consolidate? Where can we get the most bang for our bucks? So our A's are using one tool as much as possible, and they're focused on their sales time. I'll mention, I've used Calendly for years myself. Any tool that reduces the amount of time back and forth between an AE and a customer, that's critical. Tools that incorporate call recordings and mutual action plans, to me, that's the thing I see as the biggest value. I never thought I'd buy a mutual action plan tool. I thought I started using them in Excel spreadsheets, but if you can document and lay out next steps, and record your calls and send those to your customers and listen to them, those are the two best things that's going to help a salesperson. And I implore anybody who's running operations or in a VP role, really look at your tech stack and say, how many tools am I using? Can I consolidate? And how many fields do I really need on the opportunity level?
Yeah, totally agree. I think if you look at your tech stack, you think, is this making it easier or more difficult for my sellers to sell? Is it adding more for them to do that does not directly relate to working with and serving and winning customers? Well, and if the answer to that question is yes, I think you gotta take a close look and ask yourself why. And at Calendly, we're big on drinking our own champagne here, and we heavily leverage it to make sure that from acquisition, we're routing customers that are at that moment of intent directly to the correct person on the sales team, as opposed to giving them the traditional form fill, thank you page experience. We're routing them in real time when they raise their hand, if they're at that precious moment of intent, to the correct booking page for the correct account executive that they need to meet with. So they get to book that meeting at their convenience right away. And we know that 50% or greater of the time, someone is going to buy from the first vendor or the first provider that has an adequate technology to address their needs that they can talk to. So I think getting your go-to-market teams and your sellers really focused on when somebody is at that moment of intent, opportunity that's a qualified opportunity, someone who would be a good fit, that is where your time and focus and energy should be, and not to hit vanity metrics for outbound calls or emails to try to build more pipeline. Focus on what's in front of you. And this ladders back to my sentiment around having a targeted focus and knowing your ICP. Go really deep with the customers that you know are strong fits, and focus wisely to build those data-driven business cases with them. And as much time as they will give you, like that's where you should be spending your focus and time to mature those deals and close that pipeline down.
Yeah, I'll tag on it here. And using tools like Calendly, anything that gets an incoming lead to your AEs faster. I'm not an opinion that SDR should be handling inbound of an ideal ICP anymore. And I'll give a perfect example. A couple of years ago, I was trying to buy a Salesforce. I had bought Salesforce. I'd worked at Salesforce. I had worked at a Salesforce partner. And I had to go through an SDR to talk to an AE just to really fundamentally get pricing. And, I could have easily gone to another vendor and potentially gotten a better experience. So you can't treat your inbound prospects the same as you treat your outbound prospects. They are two very distinct motions. And when someone's coming to your website and asking to speak to somebody, do not make it harder for them to do that. It is critical that they get to those people quickly.
Yeah, great ideas and thoughts there. And just to close out, right? I was, one of my close reps that I work with, there was a family member that was going through a cancer treatment, and unfortunately, this was a moment of truth. How are they going to be able to afford that kind of treatment? And that's what put a premium on how they should think about their time and what that meant. And so in this case, the first line manager actually sat down with them and said, well, what's it going to take? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? How much do you need? Let's break it down. Let's put a value on every hour of your day. Maybe $350, it's $600, whatever that is. That's how much every hour of your time on your calendar is worth. So now you think about that in terms of where do you want to spend that time? And it actually can be a little bit too harsh at times, but by bringing that mindset, it was very much outcome driven, and you can almost see that ended up driving clarity in terms of where are the value add activities versus where can I really have my sales and go to market and systems team kind of help provide that leverage, right, to some of the tools you mentioned, and really help bring the A game. So I'll just, in closing, I'll maybe just ask one more question and we can go round robin. Is any last key takeaways, and what's your leadership style or mantra in this economy, or guidance out to the broader kind of community out there as we navigate the next hopefully year or so out there?
I'll say this to the salespeople, it's be compassionate, be understanding, but everybody's going through this. You're being pressured, their sales are being pressured. Understand that and be compassionate. And the best way that you can help yourself is being direct in a polite way. If you don't ask the question and ask for the information you need to understand if the deal makes sense to move forward, if you don't ask that, you're failing to service them as a salesperson, and likely not going to get that opportunity to close because there's just too many competing interests. So, be respectful, be understanding, but also stand up for yourself and ask the hard questions, because that's how this gets done in these types of environments.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think for me, similar, I would say, look, there's a lot of excitement and conversation around AI and how it's going to change our industry. And, certainly it will, and it already has. But I think as a seller, this is the time to be human and use your humanity as a strength and be empathetic and put yourself on the same side of the table as your customer. And by doing that, you actually are going to build more trust, build more credibility, and optimize the chances of building a strong data-driven business case that's going to impact your customer's bottom line and solve the problems for them that they're looking to solve.
Amazing. And I'll leave you with this. Our CRO says, love the work. And I think the deep work, there's a lot of value in kind of like making sure that you're honing your craft in those moments. And excellence is never an accident. It's usually the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution, right? And that essentially would determine your destiny, is what I believe.
Love the wisdom. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for our amazing panelists, Bo, Mike, and Samarth, for that amazing wisdom that you shared and insights. I know we're at time, so please do check out the sponsor at the top right-hand corner with all the links to Calendly, and we will see you at the next event. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Bye.
Have a great one.